Okay, let's jump right into this explainer because today we are completely dismantling one of the biggest misconceptions about Game of Thrones' most infamous player. We're going to totally rethink Peter Baelish, the guy who literally built an empire on secrets, whispers, and betrayal.
Everyone just assumes Littlefinger was the smartest guy in the room, right? Like he was this ultimate, untouchable mastermind, pulling all the political strings in Westeros. But the truth is actually way darker, and honestly, a lot more fascinating. He wasn't actually that smart. He was just willing to do what emotionally stable people absolutely won't. I mean, think about his betrayal of Ned Stark in the throne room. That wasn't some stroke of unparalleled intellectual genius. It was just a ruthless willingness to completely throw honor and basic decency out the window to cause chaos. And that subtle distinction, the difference between true intellect and pure obsession, that's exactly why he ultimately lost.
So let's start with part one, the mastermind myth, and challenge this whole illusion of genius.
We are constantly told, and to be fair, shown, that he's this incredibly patient, calculating mastermind, playing three-dimensional chess. We see him whispering in ears, turning allies against each other, and climbing his famous ladder of chaos. He's sold everyone on this grand philosophy that chaos isn't a pit, it's a ladder, right? An opportunity for brilliant minds to ascend. And because of epic moments like that, fans and characters alike just slapped these labels on him. Strategic, calculated, patient. It became his ultimate reputation across the Seven Kingdoms.
If you look a little closer and strip away the mystique, that perceived strategy completely falls apart. What looks to the rest of the world like cold, calculated strategy is actually just an obsessive, frantic need for control. It's a mask for deep-seated emotional trauma. Every single move he makes, it's not about winning a political game for the intellectual thrill of it. It's a desperate effort to soothe a massive emotional wound from his past.
Which brings us to part two, the root of obsession, and where this toxic pattern actually began. He couldn't have Catelyn Tully. And that childhood humiliation didn't just hurt his feelings, it entirely defined his existence. Remember that duel for her hand? Petey, who was just a frail minor lordling at the time, challenged the hulking Brandon Stark. He was completely outmatched, physically destroyed, deeply humiliated, and only survived because Catelyn literally begged for his life. So instead of moving on from that visceral heartbreak like a normal person, he built an entirely new identity to protect himself. He's not actually chasing the Iron Throne, he's just chasing the feeling of never, ever being rejected or humiliated again.
His entire identity became a fortress built around one single goal: never be powerless again. He doesn't actually care about power for the sake of power, or wealth, or building some grand dynasty. He's desperately chasing the safety of never feeling that deep, pathetic powerlessness he felt bleeding out in the mud at River Run. And let me tell you, when someone's core motivation is just avoiding their own trauma, it's incredibly dangerous. It pushes them to extremes that rational players would completely avoid.
Let's look at part three, the illusion of genius, and break down exactly why he looks so smart to everyone around him.
So why does he seem like a genius? Well, he plays incredibly long games, he manipulates complex systems effortlessly, and he reads people like a book. He knows exactly what makes people tick and how to use it against them. Take his time as Master of Coin. The guy wasn't just balancing the books, he was intentionally bankrupting the realm. He borrowed heavily from the Iron Bank and tangled the crown in this massive web of debt that supposedly only he could manage. He made himself totally indispensable. But there's a glaring issue hiding beneath all those skills. He isn't a neutral player. He's entirely emotionally invested, which means his thinking is heavily biased right from the start. And this right here perfectly illustrates his fatal flaw. Real intelligence naturally adapts, right? It's fluid. When new information comes in or the environment changes, true intelligence re-evaluates the risk. But Littlefinger's intelligence? It's completely rigid. He doesn't adapt to changing systems. He just escalates and forces control purely out of this neurotic, emotional need to feel like he's the one pulling the strings. Because he constantly needs to prove to himself that he's in charge, he gets stuck in this super toxic feedback loop. First, needlessly inserting himself into situations where he really doesn't belong. Second, aggressively pushing for dominance. And third, constantly escalating his own risk. I mean, think about his catastrophic decision to marry Sansa off to Ramsay Bolton. A truly rational mastermind would never surrender their most valuable political asset to a known psychopath just to create a little friction in the north. But Pittier needed to force his control over the situation, escalating his own risk to an absurd degree. He needs that daily hit of feeling powerful, and it completely blinds him to actual long-term strategy. Moving to part 4, Sansa and the checkmate. Enter the system breaker. We have to ask,
Out of all the powerful players in Westeros, why was Sansa the one to checkmate him? Because he arrogantly believed he could guide her, shape her, and totally control her outcome, exactly like he'd done with the political system. He saw her as an extension of Catelyn and an extension of his own power to manipulate. He genuinely thought he was building a protege, but he was literally just handing her the blueprint to his own psychological weaknesses. And she did the one thing his rigid, trauma-built system simply couldn't handle. She recognized his behavioral pattern and she completely removed his control by just not needing him anymore. That breaks his entire system. Think back to his final moments during that trial at Winterfell. He is utterly baffled. Sansa uses his own teachings against him, flipping the script in front of all the Northern Lords. When the person you are obsessively trying to control realizes they hold the cards and sees right through your act, the illusion shatters instantly. He was left crying on his knees because his script had entirely run out.
Littlefinger didn't lose because he was outsmarted in the traditional sense. He lost because he literally could not stop playing. Seriously, think about it. Even when he was way ahead, when he had stabilized his power as Lord Protector of the Vale and could have easily just stopped and lived out his days in absolute luxury, his identity demanded that he keep playing. Control wasn't just a strategy anymore, it was his entire identity. To stop playing meant facing his own emptiness, and he just couldn't do it.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, the fatal pattern, taking this from Westeros to the real world.
I want you to really let this thought sink in. They fail because they can't step out of the pattern that made them strong. In the real world, whether we're talking about business, relationships, or politics, people rarely fail just because they're weak. No, they fail because they get hopelessly trapped in the exact mechanisms they originally used to survive.
You can watch this tragic evolution unfold all the time as positive survival traits warp into incredibly destructive forces. Ambition slowly rots into greed. Careful strategy devolves into toxic manipulation. And that sharp awareness you develop to protect yourself, it crosses the line into complete paranoia. It's like a business leader who builds a wildly successful company through intense micromanagement, only to have that exact same trait destroy the empire once it scales, all because they simply couldn't let go of the control.
So what's the real takeaway from this explainer today? It's that the story of Pityr Baelish is not a masterclass in intelligence. It is a giant, flashing warning sign about the terminal outcome of unresolved emotional drivers. If your drive comes from deep-seated insecurity, it will eventually, inevitably, destroy you. It is just a matter of time. Because eventually, the very thing that built you becomes the exact thing that exposes you. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider in your own life. Is the very pattern that built your success secretly turning into the fatal flaw that will eventually expose you? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.